And for our next presenter, she has a doctorate degree in literary studies from Silliman University and a Master of Science degree in library science from the University of San Carlos. She is a recipient of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts Dissertation Research Award in 2020 and the National Committee on Literary Arts Manunulat Documentary Grant in 2021. So she is Dr. Bea Lastimosa, and she will be presenting through video.
Good morning. It is my privilege to be presenting in this conference, Food for Life, Lessons from the Garden, organized by the Cebuano Studies Center. The title of my presentation is Nourishing Inclusion, the Role of Food and Eating in Lamberto Ceballos' Works. So allow me to share my PowerPoint. So as a young reader, it was always for the witty conversations and the climaxes that I sped through the pages of my books, sometimes skipping whole paragraphs dedicated to descriptions. It was only when I matured as a reader that I came to savor the sensual details of touch, sight, and smell in a narrative, all those details, in short, that add beauty and meaning to a text. In the same way, it took some time for me to notice food and the act of eating in literature. Those two things always seemed incidental to me, only registering when it was glaringly symbolic, like the forbidden fruit in the Book of Genesis, the alluring Turkish delights of the White Witch, or Alice's curious eat-me cakes. But food, like Terry Eagleton pointed out, is never just food. Like the post-structuralist text, food is endlessly interpretable as gift, threat, poison, recompense, barter, seduction, solidarity, suffocation. The intersection of food and literature has been an area of interest for many scholars. Cebuano literature in particular has a rich tradition of depicting food and eating practices as integral facets of social and cultural life. In literature, food assumes the roles of identity marker, social status indicator, and cultural heritage bearer. It becomes a potent tool for exploring themes of community, family dynamics, and interpersonal relationships. Writing on the semiotics of food, Roland Barthes asks, for what is food? It is not only a collection of products. It is also, and at the same time, a system of communication, a body of images, a protocol of usages, situations, and behavior. Lamberto Ceballos' stories are a rich source for the study of this question. They are replete with descriptions of food, from the early morning coffee and pandesal to the mangoes and santos sold by the street vendors, the puso and the dried fish sold at Nang Simas, the coconut toddy drank by the sidewalk, the glass of warm water drank to stave off hunger, and the sweet yams, taro, bayakag, wild ubi, and saging gardaba, cultivated from the ground and served on a poor man's table. But perhaps more crucial in my reading of his stories are the social relationships that he explores in the act of eating, whether it be in the act of eating alone or the act of eating together. So born in 1942 in Kawayan, Dalaget, Lamberto Ceballos is a respected figure in Cebuano literature, having received numerous awards for his fiction and poetry. He earned a writing fellowship at the esteemed Silliman Writers' Workshop under the guidance of the Tiempos, and was honored with a coveted prize from the Carlos Palanca Foundation for his exceptional Cebuano fiction. In 2005, he was recognized as the Writer of the Year by Batalanong Halad sa Dagang, Incorporated, Cebu, further affirming his talent. The Cebu City government also acknowledged his valuable contributions to the Cebuano language and culture through Resolution number 031-1091 on September 10, 2003. This well-deserved honor reflects the impact of his literary work on our community. So this paper delves into four of Ceballos' short stories, namely The Ungo o San Pilar, The Road to Darkness, Hunger in Ayawak, and The New Door, to examine the ways in which food and eating practices act as isolating or unifying forces in Cebuano literature, how they serve as markers for exclusion and inclusion, and how they act as catalysts of reintegration into the social fabric. David Goldston defines, so in this part of the paper, I will talk about interruptions and commensality. David Goldston defines commensality as food in its relational aspect. It is eating conceived as a network or as a principle of connectivity. Now, commensality primarily signifies the social dimensions of sharing a meal. However, in a broader sense, commensality encompasses the spectrum of relationships that emerge and solidify through the act of eating. Commensal relationships and its interruptions inform much of Ceballos' works. Now, more than the culinary aspect of eating, that is the what of eating, Ceballos also explores its communal aspect or the how of eating. So this is pointed out also by Valerie Leuchot in her paper, The Ethics of Eating Together. The how of eating, of course, is a social problem since considering the how of eating inevitably leads us to the question of with whom of eating. This is especially important when one considers the fact that commensality does not always imply pleasure. Commensality can thus be a site of tension, hostility, isolation, and interruption. This section will look into the ways that Ceballos uses interruptions in commensality, the how and with whom of eating, in his narratives to reflect alienation and isolation. Now, in the Umo of San Pilar, Iyo Baloy is an old man who was once well loved by the townspeople for the many handmade toys that he distributed to the children. After his wife's passing and his decision to honor her final wish by burying her beside their hut on the hills of San Pilar instead of in the town cemetery, he earns the reputation of being an Umo, one who preys on the blood and liver of people and on the unborn children in a woman's womb. The townspeople also suspect him of slowly feeding off the flesh of his dead wife. He quickly becomes a social outcast. Now, the rumors of cannibalism is amplified in the story when Iyo Baloy notices a group of small children playing near his hut. When a child is bitten by a snake, Iyo Baloy rushes to save the child's life by sucking the venom out of his punctured leg. Although he saves the child's life, the townspeople immediately accuse him of drinking the boy's blood, and he is attacked by a mob of angry men and women who beat him senseless and throw him into jail. So food and eating practices become the media of social exclusion in the Umo of San Pilar. It is the rumors of his transgressive eating practices that initiate the act of social exclusion for Iyo Baloy. The act of eating, as pointed out by Goldstein, always carries with it an act of exclusion. While most meals bring certain individuals together, it also inevitably excludes others. In Ceballos' narrative, the denial of food equals exclusion, or at least signals the social inferiority of the individual. Now, Iyo Baloy in the story is unable to eat since the townspeople no longer buy the puso and banana buds that he usually sells. This reduces him to a state of begging. In one particular scene in the narrative, Iyo Baloy enters the town and begs for food. There he encounters teenagers who mockingly offer him a glass of palm toddy from the store. He overhears them saying that it is better to make friends with an Umo since they are rumored not to harm their neighbors. They also insist that the seller give him a piece of stale rice cake which Iyo Baloy eats after shaking off the red ants on it. When the seller breaks and throws the handmade toy that Iyo Baloy tries to give to the seller's child, the teenagers merely laugh at him. Here we see a kind of disruption and interruption in commensality, leaving one to wonder at the fate of commensality in a town riddled with unkindness and a lack of empathy. Several scenes in the story also present Iyo Baloy in the act of eating alone and having imaginary conversations with his dead wife. This is a reflection not only of his loneliness and exclusion from others, but also from himself. For instance, in the story when Iyo Baloy returns home to his hut after being released from prison for sucking the venom out of the child's leg, he finds himself conversing with his dead wife, imagining that his vision of her was her way of trying to warn him to be more cautious. The meal that he then prepares for himself is composed of boiled yams, which he eats alone. So let me read an excerpt from the story, translated into English by Dr. Ho Pugh. "Better watch out next time," he said, protruding his lips. Then Iya Petra faded from his sight. His face grew gloomy, and then he realized that he was alone in the hut. He went to find the sack where they kept the root crops, and he found 4 small sweet yams left. He brought these to the kitchen and put them in a pot. He poured water in the container and settled this on the 3 stones on the stove. He looked for the match. After putting some wood and coconut palms onto the stove, he lit the match and lighted the palms. It caught fire. Because food serves as a crucial bond within the community, eating alone or dining with his deceased wife does not constitute a true act of nourishment. The way in which Ioboloy consumes his meals within the short story underscores his profound isolation, marking his severed connections not only with others but also with his own sense of self. To echo Valerie Leuchott's perspective, for Schwartz-Bart, another writer, if eating alone is not eating, then Ioboloy essentially ceases to eat. Ceballos underscores the notion that solitary eating lacks the depth of true sustenance, emphasizing that acts of communal dining must carry an ethical dimension to hold any genuine significance. So this contrast is evident in the comparison between the teenager's thoughtless and flippant offering of food and the compassionate gesture of Iya Bashang. Iya Bashang emerges as a significant figure in Ioboloy's life, serving as his last remaining friend in the town, a connection rooted in their shared history since youth. Her genuine friendship is manifested through a simple yet profound act of food sharing. "Come," said Iya Bashang, who was holding a tobacco. Ioboloy approached Iya Bashang. "Boloy, it's some leftovers." She handed Ioboloy the tobacco. It doesn't matter if it's leftovers, Bashang. So long as it's heartily given, it's valuable to the one receiving it, Ioboloy said smilingly. This is again translated by Dr. Hope Yu. So as the story unfolds, the townspeople come to recognize this meaningful connection when they bestow gifts of food upon Ioboloy in a heartwarming display of welcome and gratitude. The policeman offers him puso to take home. The teenager respectfully presents a glass of kinutil to warm his stomach. A seller gives him budbud, and Iya Bashang provides fresh tobacco. Upon his return home, a remarkable transformation occurs within Ioboloy. His mind clears, and the ghost of his dead wife dissipates from their hut. In its place, thoughts of a living woman, Iya Bashang, now occupy his thoughts. This shift signifies Boloy's reintegration into the realm of the living, marking a poignant and hopeful turning point in his journey. Now, here I'll talk about the ethics of commensality. The idea of ethical goodness in eating and in commensality is expressed in Derrida's essay on the subject of eating, which stems from a French pun laden with multiple interpretations. The phrase, which I will not attempt to read out loud, but you can see on the screen, translates to "we must eat well" in English. Derrida asserts the ethical imperative of eating well, or determining the best, most respectful, most grateful, and also most giving way of relating to the other and of relating the other to the self. Now, Leuchott offers insight into how the notion of good or bien enriches Derrida's philosophy of eating, encompassing 4 dimensions. First, the imperative to eat for survival. Second, the necessity of eating healthily. Third, the culinary and aesthetic pleasures of eating. And fourth, the pursuit of ethical goodness in eating. Now, according to Leuchott, who wrote about Simon Schwartz-Bart and Chinua Achebe, according to her, both Schwartz-Bart and Achebe underscore the pursuit of ethical goodness in eating, which to them is inseparable from the good of eating with the community. Now, this aligns with Derrida's own ethics of eating. Here, as cited in Leuchott, the question of the "we must eat well" can't only be nourishing to myself, for myself, who would then eat badly. "We must eat well" does not primarily mean to take and to comprehend within oneself, but to learn to feed the other. We never eat all alone. This is the rule of the "we must eat well." It is a law of infinite hospitality. Now, for Derrida, the ethical aspect of eating doesn't revolve solely around eating for one's benefit. Rather, it involves the process of acquiring the ability and the empathy to nourish others. Now, Ceballos delves into the ethical framework of eating and commensality in his next story, The Road to Darkness. Now, the narrative unfolds with 2 children navigating a life of petty crime as a means of survival, engaging in activities such as stealing copra from trucks, participating in illicit betting, and breaking into warehouses. However, amidst their illegal acts, there exists a profound sense of camaraderie and goodness, most notably exemplified in the meals, the very simple meals they take together. Now, in one of the scenes, Fidel and Samuel, the two young boys, procure the modest yet stable sustenance of the poor man's uh, meal, the puso and the dried fish, and slip into Fort San Pedro to savor their meal while relishing the view. Now, this act, although this was against the law to eat in Fort San Pedro, encapsulates the essence of their bond. So let me read an excerpt from the story, again translated by Dr. Hope. Let me join you. Fidel and Samuel paused from bringing food into their mouths, their eyes drawn to a child who stood in front of them. It seemed as if the child just woke up. Perhaps he had fallen asleep inside the fort. Fidel glanced at Samuel, who was sizing the kid up from head to toe. The kid was filthy, but he forced a shy smile. Get away from us! Don't you see this is just enough for both of us? Fidel snapped. The child looked at the food sitting on the banana leaf. Fidel knew that the child was hungry, but he could not share their food because it was just enough for both him and Samuel. Then he saw Samuel give his part of the share. He looked up to the child again. Come, let's share my portion, invited Samuel. The child did not wait to be invited again. He immediately joined in. Fidel sensed the tears streaming from the child's eyes. He glanced at Samuel, who stared back at him. Fidel felt like ice melting. He remembered his first meeting with Samuel. Now, surprisingly, the story's unexpected hero is the elder of the two, Samuel, who possesses a wealth of streetwise experience. Now, compared to Fidel, Samuel is considered to be a bad boy. He is no stranger to encounters with law enforcement, having endured apprehensions and beatings by the police. Also, his motivations for thievery differs from Fidel's, as he wages stolen copra and runs with an older crowd, a more delinquent crowd, involved in knife-wielding activities and warehouse break-ins. However, it is Samuel who imparts the lesson of infinite hospitality to Fidel. Their first meeting happened on a rainy night, and much like the encounter with a child at the fort, Fidel is famished and desperate, and Samuel provided him with shelter from the rain, treating him to a warm cup of coffee the following morning, and alleviating the profound hunger pangs gnawing at his stomach, or the kabuhi in his stomach. Now, throughout this story, Ceballos imparts a powerful message to readers. To dine meaningfully is to share, regardless of the simplicity or scarcity of the meal. One should not eat for himself alone, but also learn to feed the other. Now, Ceballos also further explores this theme of learning to feed the other and of infinite hospitality in Hunger in Nayawak. Within this narrative, a harrowing drought has gripped the town of Nayawak for 4 relentless months, leaving its inhabitants with scant sustenance, primarily relying on the meager root crops from their barren land. The unyielding dry spell has also rendered the once arable soil hard and unworkable. At the center of the story is Manong Cardo, the protagonist, whose fury is kindled by the threat of his prized saging gardaba, a particular variety of banana fruit. This thief pilfered not only the ripe bananas, but also those that were still green and unfit for consumption. Aside from the bananas that were stolen from him, Manong Cardo's prized possessions are the corn grits that he has been saving. This sole remaining source of nourishment has been depleted to the point where he and his wife must conserve what remains or what is left for planting in the impending season. So he is reluctant to share this precious resource even with his cousin Ating, and he and his wife do not eat anymore of what is left of what is remaining of these corn grits. So here's an excerpt from the story where he tells his wife not to give their corn grits, where he says, don't meddle with the kernels, Esther, no matter what happens. We don't have savings with which to buy seeds in the city. We haven't even touched that for our consumption, so why should they? We are just even subsisting on sweet yams and butig. Now, Manong in the story also grapples with suspicions that his neighbor, Timoy, may have pilfered his bananas. So he thinks that there's no one else who could have stolen his bananas. So he is conflicted with a disconcerting mix of emotions as he recalls that Timoy's family is enduring challenging times, with a newborn baby just joining their family and their crops falling victim to the unrelenting drought. Now, despite his anger, Manong is perplexed, for he knows Timoy to be a good-hearted man. Now, the following day, Manong unintentionally overhears a conversation between Timoy and his wife, where Timoy fabricates a story claiming that Manong had willingly given him the 2 stolen bunches of bananas. So their discussion further unveils the dire straits they are in, as Timoy's wife expresses her need to consume corn kernels to sustain herself and for her to be able to nurse their newborn baby. Now, overwhelmed by guilt, Timoy eventually confesses the theft to his wife, who weeps at the revelation, thinking that their children had consumed stolen food. So, determined to make amends, he resolves to come clean to Manong Cardo. Now, in a moment of empathy in the story, Manong Cardo's heart softens as he reflects on his own beloved grandchildren and what it would feel like if they were in the same position of hunger as Timoy and his children. So, moved by compassion, he forgives Timoy and offers him 3 kilograms of his cherished corn kernels. Now, as if in response to this act of forgiveness and reconciliation, rain finally falls on Ayawak that very evening, bringing to an end the relentless drought. So Ceballos crafts a narrative in this story that vividly illustrates the concept of infinite hospitality, showcasing numerous instances of this generous practice in the story, actually. So, for instance, when Manong pays a visit to Pare Dabong, the latter readily offers him a glass of water to quench his thirst. Moreover, he also willingly agrees to assist Manong in filling his parched cornfield, despite the daunting challenge posed by the dry and unforgiving earth. He extends his generosity even further by offering to assist with Manong land before tending to his own plot. However, the crux of this story lies in its emphasis on the importance of providing hospitality that is not contingent upon the character of the recipient, just like the story of Manong and how he forgave Timoy. In doing so, it highlights the selfless and unconditional nature of infinite hospitality, underlining the intrinsic value of extending kindness to others. So Jessica Carey writes on this that Derrida often works with a Levinasian framework that emphasizes how the only hospitality to the other worthy of the name hospitality is one that does not presume any knowledge of the other. How could your decision to open your door to a stranger be contingent upon knowing what that stranger will be like? If you are certain of the stranger's attributes, he or she ceases to be a stranger, and you have ceased to be hospitable. Now, it's intriguing to note or to observe that whenever scarcity is mentioned in the story, Manong always returns home and inquires about the meal his wife has prepared. And without fail, each of these moments are consistently accompanied by vivid descriptions of humble yet delectable fare, the honest, frugal food of the less fortunate. Just as the land resiliently yields sustenance even in times of poverty, the story underscores the parallel lesson that people too must embrace a similar ethos. To facilitate the healing of the land, a sense of mutual care and support must prevail within the community. This interconnectedness is essential for the growth of empathy within Manong leading him to extend understanding and compassion to Temang. Simultaneously, it fosters the growth of honesty and the willingness to confess one's transgression within Temang, a crucial step toward personal growth and redemption.
Let us all give a round of applause to Dr. Bea Lastimosa's presentation.